So afternoon, good evening. I suppose it is evening officially, really, because it's 5 o'clock. Welcome to UK Crime Book Club, and it's our Winterfest today. So we are joined today. Sorry, I'm just trying to get Facebook joined in as well. So I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined for our panel, which is called The Goonies, which is an 80s film for those of you who are too young to remember the 1980s. Unfortunately, I'm not. Which is about a group of children who are sort of being together for the last time, and they have an adventure. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Melissa, who is called Melissa, but writes under the YA name of BB Taylor, and Andreina Cordani, who also writes adult fiction. And I know that you've got a Christmas book out, haven't you, at the moment? Because I saw it in Toppings in Bath on Friday when I was in there. So we were due to be joined by William, but unfortunately William is poorly today. So sorry that you can't join us, William, but I'm sure there'll be other times. So thank you, ladies, for joining us this afternoon. So would you like to start by introducing yourself and your books?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
My name's Andreina Cordani. I basically make up things in my head and kill people with my mind, and it somehow. So I'm the author of two young adult books. The first one is called The Girl Who, and that's kind of more of a psychological thriller, and it's about a girl who grew up having kind of witnessed her mother and sister's murders, and grew up with this sort of heavy kind of knowledge on her, but also grew up sort of becoming famous as a result of the crime, and how she deals with that, and how she deals with her revengey feelings that she's having, and also how she deals with her annoying, glitter-loving, attention-seeking stepsister that moves in. So that's that one. And then Dead Lucky is basically a thriller about an influencer that gets murdered on camera, and how everything goes completely crazy after that. He gets killed on camera by a guy in a scary mask, or a character in a mask. And then
that sounds amazing.
Nuts trying to figure out who it is. And then I've also written 2 Christmas crime novels for adults.
Fantastic. They both sound really good. My Christmas list is growing, and I've got a self-enforced 2025 book ban. So
it's awful.
Yes, sir. Well,
so I've been a children's author for about 10 years, but I had my first YA book out in November, and it's called Running, and it's all about a girl that's on the run, and she can't remember why. She doesn't know who's after her, why they're after her, but all she knows is that she needs to fight to survive, and ends up doing some horrible things in the name of survival. And the story follows her as she looks for the answers to what's going on. So lots of shadowy government programs and crimes being committed, and lots of violence and fast paced. So yeah, it was my first YA book, and it was a really interesting month. November was, because I had my first YA book out, and then I had my first adult book out at the same month. So it was a bit of a roller coaster of a month for me. So
yeah, that sounds very busy. And I guess with your Christmas books as well, there's promotion for that as well.
Yeah, it's my business. Yeah.
So what's inspired you to sort of, because you said that you were a children's author, and you've obviously written adult books as well. What sort of inspired you originally to write YA fiction? And I don't mind who goes first.
I'm not really.
Everybody's being very polite.
That would
I suppose for me, my YA book was one of the first books I ever actually wrote. And it just so happened that it didn't get published for years. So it got picked up by 2 publishers who both kind of decided they had something too similar at the time, or decided that it wasn't quite what they were looking for. But it was one of the very, very first things that I wrote. And then I ended up getting contracted for chapter books and middle grade books. But I had this YA book that I fell in love with, and I never fell out of love with it. I think sometimes you write something and after a while you kind of put it to the side and you forget about it. But this YA book was just, you know, something that stuck with me the whole time. So when it eventually got its contract to be published, I was like, finally, you know, 10 years later, it's finally got its moment. And then I'd been dipping between sort of YA and adult and, you know, how far you could push things. And then all of a sudden I got this contract for an adult book at the same time. And, you know, the two are both crime books, but they're very different in sort of the tone and the pace and, you know, how far you can push them and what you're allowed to do in them. So, yeah, for me, it was just about, you know, an idea that popped in my head. I'm not a plotter by any means. And all of my stories, the thing I love about writing is I never know where my story's going to end up. So for me, it's the fun of going along with the characters and finding out where it's going to lead to at the same time.
I mean, that sounds very sort of, I mean, the fact that you're not a plotter and that you've got all that going on as well just like blows my mind, because it just, and also scares me slightly at the same time, I think.
Yeah, short attention span likes to flick between projects. It is one of my many downfalls, but, you know, it works in my favour occasionally.
And the question was about YA, wasn't it? Why?
Yeah, what inspired you to sort of write YA books in the first place?
I think I have been trapped at 14 years old for like my whole life. I think I'm still like, I like writing young adult fiction because it's all about identity and figuring out who you are and dealing with like the weight of people's expectations on you, and whether you want to be the person your parents want you to be, or you want to be or you think you want to be something else. And for some reason, I'm still figuring out who I am and what I want to be and how to deal with people's expectations. So I think, you know, I just really identify with it still. And even though I write for adults now and I'm writing another book for adults at the moment, I will never stop thinking of YA ideas and cooking up YA stories.
I think you sort of touched on one of the things I was going to ask actually about sort of the sort of responsibility, I guess, and the sort of being able to sort of reach that audience of for a young adult, because obviously, you know, we're all sort of adults, but you said about being sort of stuck in that sort of perpetual young person view yourself. Is it like do you feel a responsibility to sort of make the characters be reflected in, you know, certain people or certain topics or things like that, or is it just what you feel when you start?
I don't feel, I mean, I feel a responsibility, you know, to do the sort of things that a lot of YA authors do, like, you know, representation of different diversities and things like that. I do think that it's important to see people making mistakes on, you know, on the page, and you have to tread that line. You know, you have to see people making silly mistakes and doing silly things. Well, otherwise there wouldn't be a plot, for one thing. So I don't know. I think also hidden in that question is, you know, I do feel sometimes a bit like that I'm an older person, because I am an older person writing for teenagers, and that, you know, maybe there are more relevant voices out there, but at the same time, you know, I'm still doing it because I love doing it. So maybe it's selfish.
And Melissa?
I think you're right in everything you're saying. And I think, you know, we have a duty to, you know, make sure that what we're putting out there and what we're writing about, that we're comfortable with it and we can stand behind it, and, you know, we're comfortable for anyone to read it. But I think it's about pushing boundaries as well. There's so much gatekeeping nowadays about what young people can and can't read. And then think back to what we were reading at those ages and what we were comfortable reading. And you're there thinking, well, I read that at that age, and nowadays that would be, you know, that would be classed as, you know, not appropriate for my age. So what's the difference now? Are we saying that, you know, young people aren't responsible enough to read the things that we were? Or, you know, there's been a very big shift in culture. And as you said, it's about representation. It's about making sure that books are diverse, but it's also making sure that stories are told in the most authentic way we can, and not kind of dulling them down or censoring them to a point where we're, you know, creating barriers for young people to be able to escape into books and express themselves and see themselves in books.
Yeah.
You know, we have a duty to be, you know, responsible in how we write, but I think we also have a duty to be able to let young people explore themes and, you know, and topics that may not necessarily be the most comfortable sometimes.
And I think about, well, two things that I think about from what you said there is that, one, what I was reading at sort of 13, 14, because YA was very limited when I was a teenager. Sort of Judy Blume was just about sort of coming out, and I remember reading Forever about 50 times. But I read James Herbert, and I still have a fear of rats. I read Agatha Christie. I read Virginia Andrews, all completely unsuitable. But Jackie Collins, Jilly Cooper, all those sorts. But you know, so yeah, I mean, I always, with my own children, was very much, I thought they were really lucky to have the sort of breadth of authors and topics that are available now. So I think it is, like you said, it's about being able to like trust them, isn't it? To be able to read, you know, and not censor, but also be able to give them things. So things like Heartstopper, which have literally just been humongous for adults and children. It's just a different time, isn't it, really?
I remember, you know, my 8th birthday, I remember I got 3 books from my uncle, and an 8-year-old opening books, you know, fantastic. And it was Jacqueline Wilson, Girls in Love, Mary Shelley Frankenstein, and Mort by Terry Pratchett. And looking back, none of those books were ones that you'd give to an 8-year-old. But he always said to me, you know, if you can be widely read and you can, you know, adapt to any situation, you're a lot more prepared for the world ahead. And, you know, I think, you know, getting those 3 books at that age, I may not have fully understood them all at the time, but I enjoyed them and I enjoyed the stories behind them. And then rereading them as an adult or even in my teens, you then look at them in a different light again. You take something away from them. So I think, I think, you know, there's so much gatekeeping nowadays in books that, you know, it's quite sad to see in a way. I understand why it's there, but I also think, you know, sometimes it stops young people reaching books that could potentially help them.
Yeah. And I think some of the YA books that I read sort of as they sort of came into publication have covered some really hard hitting topics that you probably wouldn't get in an adult book, because it probably wouldn't, I don't know if it would work, but it does work in YA. So what's the most challenging part of writing a YA novel? Is it that sort of, you know, getting the voice right and being able to relate, or is it something else?
Do you want to go first for that one?
I think for me, it's how far can you go without going too far? Because YA and adult, I mean, you've got a large readership of adults that will read YA, you know, that enjoy YA. But there is a line, and there's certain things you can get away with in adult books that you can't get away with in YA, as I've learned over the last few years. And it's been quite an experience writing between the two, because you have to kind of switch your head back into, right, I need to go back into YA mode now. No, I can't include that, but I can include it in that. So I think for me, it's knowing how far you can push it, because you want to push it as far as you can so that your readers are getting as much as they can from the book, but it's how far can you push it without going too far. And especially when it comes to, you know, books that potentially do have a lot of action or violence, or, you know, sensitive topics in there, it's what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I think that's the thing that I always worry about the most, is making sure that I get the balance right.
I don't think you have to kind of massively moderate your language or anything like that. Well, you certainly don't have to simplify your language, and I don't know about anyone else, but I don't ever simplify my plots. In fact, you know, I consider like young YA readers are so, they've seen flipping everything. If they're wide read, you know, they've read it, and they know their tropes and everything, so they're pretty canny. So I would never change that at all. I do think though sometimes in adult books there's more of a thing, I'm trying to word this right, like I think where you can let injustice sit. So you can have, I've got like the characters in my Christmas books, a lot of them are pretty ghastly. I mean, they all get bumped off in hideous ways. And a lot of them are awful human beings. And I can just let them be awful human beings. And actually they're still like, I try and make them awful, but they occasionally do sympathetic things. So they're not like completely irredeemable, but I can let them be awful without having anyone go, oh, you can't talk like that. Whereas I think, in YA, there's a feeling that you need to call that out straight away rather than watch that person meet a really horrible sticky end. So yeah, I think people are. I think there's much more of a feeling that you can't let certain kinds of language slide, otherwise you're giving it tacit approval. Whereas with adult books, they kind of get that you're just reflecting the character. At least I hope they do. They don't think I'm a ghastly person as well.
Oh, I think there's something really. I mean, I love a book with a ghastly cast because you just really want them all to end up over the cliff or under wherever they're going to end up, or and I imagine that's part of the fun, isn't it? The part of the fun of the reader is to find out how. That makes me sound a bit like a psycho, but I'm not. But the fun of like how they're going to end up. Whereas I imagine if you were, you wouldn't be doing that for like basically bumping off a teenager would probably not, in a really horrible way. Just for fun would not possibly be the right thing to do.
Oh, I don't know. It happens. I mean, there's lots of really good horror reads where people get bumped off one by one, and pretty ghastly people as well. But yeah, I just think there's just you just have to be delicate about it, and you have to there is a little bit of a calling out when they behave obnoxiously, I think.
Yeah, it's almost like that sort of like being told what's right and wrong, I guess, maybe. I mean, but to be honest, some of them in the adult books need to have that done to them as well. It's too late.
Yeah, well, they're adults now. They're never going to change. So
exactly. I mean, some of them they really need to sit down, don't they, and be told what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. What sort of, when you sort of start, because obviously you've got different themes in your books, and one of them was like social media, and I think you were saying about that. So like what young adults and children have to sort of deal with today is very different again to what we had growing up. And do you find that sort of aids writing because there is, or does it make it more complicated because there's so many different sort of topics, social media and cyberbullying and all those sorts of things? It's almost like, where do I go?
I don't know about you, Melissa, but I think the main problem that any thriller writer has, writing for any age group, but particularly young adult, is how can we make their phones not work so they can't call for help?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the first problem you have to solve.
Stick them on an island, isn't it? That's what quite a lot of, or a power, or there's a storm, or.
Well, I used to read a lot of Lois Duncan, and she was like coming out. She was a YA person. She was writing just like, before I became a YA, I suppose, before I was a teenager, and I read a lot of hers. And then she updated them in the 90s, and she had to add in all of these extra lines about, oh, I left my phone at home, and oh, my battery was dead. And I wrote that author's note on one of the books saying, like, it's really hard because I can't use the same excuse in every book.
It's like, how do you ask the parents, and how do you get rid of the mobile phone without it sounding deeply?
Well, yeah.
I mean, I was quite lucky because the main trope of this book is she's got no memory. So she's on the run. She's trying not to be tracked. She's trying to be off the grid and off the radar. So it all kind of worked in my favour for that. So I was quite lucky in that sense. And I've tended to find that the stories that I've wanted to write, or the stories that have come to me, haven't had that sort of trope or that sort of necessity for technology. So I've been quite blessed with that so far. But I think it is a nightmare. We've I've discussed it with other children's authors before, and it's always like, how do we off the parents, and how do we get rid of the phone, and how do we make it look as natural as possible? And it's not easy to do, unless it's a comedy. Then you can make it as eccentric as you want.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. I think with Dead Lucky, Dead Lucky was actually my obsession with social media. So I was writing it during the height of lockdown, and I was also coming to terms with the fact. So the girl who was published in January 2021. And so I was coming to terms with the fact that I was now having to post online as an author and have like an author Instagram and, basically speak about my books in public and have a public persona. I mean, limited as it was compared to proper influencers. And so like, it was all that stuff about, what do I give away? What do I not give away? And that all kind of like fed into it in the end. Because those are the questions that, some people don't ask them at all and they just put everything out there. But I think increasingly, young people really want to participate in online life, but it's hard to know how much to share. And so that sort of all fed into it, really.
Yeah, because I think it's much more precarious, isn't it, being a teenager and not knowing, things like TikTok and things is like, once you've posted it and it's out there, you don't know who's looking at it. So it's very believable that, I mean, hopefully it won't ever happen, but, that something bad could happen because of it. And there have been incidences where things have happened because of social media, but not generally because they're an influencer sort of thing. Yes. So, yeah, I think it's because I guess with crime as well, like quite a lot of authors get over that by going back. So they go to a time where, people didn't have phones or, and then so Jacqueline Wilson did that, didn't she, with the Hetty Feather and things, because I remember seeing her and her saying that it just got so complicated, like real life, that she went back because she didn't have to do it then. But again, I guess that's the whole relevance, isn't it? Is if you want to be relevant and you want people to identify with what you're reading, you need it to be current in a certain, unless you're going to be reading historical. And I don't know, I guess there are historical, YA books.
Yeah.
But it depends what the audience you're writing for, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have sort of, we talked about sort of, I said about Jacqueline Wilson and Judy Blume, and did you have sort of favorite YA authors growing up or favorite authors growing up?
That's a hard one, because I think when I was growing up, you didn't think of it as a YA. It was either a kid's book or it was an adult book. It was one or the other. And a lot of the books that I probably read, when I was in my teens, I think probably would have been labelled as adult at the time, but probably would cross over into YA now. And I think it changes quite a lot. If you look at, there's authors like Kate Mallison that wrote things like The Summer of No Regrets, and that's like clean teen. So that's sort of like that 12 to 13 feel good, summer with friends. Then you've got, authors like K.L. Kettle that wrote things like The Boy I Am, which are very dystopian sort of older themes of, Handmaid's Tale that have been kind of flipped on their head. So I think YA now is much, much different to what it would have looked like when we were in our teens. I don't know if you agree. So for me, a lot of the books I read were either children's books or adult books. It was kind of, I'd see something on the shelf, and if I liked it, I liked it. And I think that's what I find quite problematic with these labels now of that's a chapter book, that's a middle grade book, that's a YA book. It's like, if it's a book and you like it, you like it. It doesn't matter who it's for. Yeah. Fair enough with trigger warnings and certain things that are age appropriate, I get that. But I think sometimes the more we put these labels on, the more we alienate people that would have enjoyed a book or would have wanted to read a book, which I think is quite sad in a way.
Mm.
I mean, I worked in a library for lots and lots of years, and over the years I saw, nearly 20 years. So from starting in the early 2000s to when I left 2 years ago, the breadth of YA fiction that came in. I mean, it was a tiny little 2 shelves when I started, to a whole section, a whole designated area, which is really exciting because and actually a lot of adults, like you said, a lot of adults read it as well, because they, my kids read, The Hunger Games and Twilight and Philip Pullman and Philip Reeve and all those types of books as YA. So, but you know, that's their adult, you know, they again cross over, don't they? So it's really, I guess it's just it's going to just keep growing, isn't it?
Hopefully.
And yeah. But then you sometimes you've got books that started out as YA and then they get reprinted and relabeled as adult. I mean, A Court of Thorn and Roses, that was YA originally, and then all of a sudden it had to go to adult. And when you think of that series and the topics and the content that's in it, you know, when you think YA is 13 plus, you know, and you've got 12 and 13-year-olds that could potentially be reading that book now because it's YA. So I think, you know, it's one of those things that's ever changing, and it's constantly, you know, moving up and down depending on what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Yeah,
there's a thing going around at the moment about the book of Wicked.
I was going to say that. Yeah,
because obviously people are buying, because it's got the film on the cover, and people are buying it for their teenagers. To be honest, I haven't read it for, I don't know, 2 decades. It's still sitting on my shelf. It's a book I really liked.
I really liked it when I read it.
Kept it all these years. I don't remember it being that inappropriate, but apparently it's super inappropriate.
Yeah,
I have to read it again to see.
I saw that, you know, people would say, oh, you know, don't buy it because it's got this in it and it's got this in it. And I couldn't remember that part of it, you know, but I guess it's different, you know, you pick up different things as well. So if, you know, I remember my kids read all the Robert Muchmore Cherub series, and, you know, they all said to me afterwards, you know, oh yeah, it was all about drugs and, you know, gangs and I had no idea. I was just like, okay, well, you've all like to, you know, so
they didn't then grow up to become, you know,
they're not gang, you know, they're not in gangs and doing drugs, then, you know. No, not at all. But I didn't say, you know, I wanted them to pick what they wanted to read, and I think as a mum of boys, you know, it's harder to get them to read anyway. So the fact they picked a book up was, you know, pretty,
there's not so much out there, I think, for boys. You know, there's lots of female protagonists, and you know, the female protagonists that also appeal to boys, but yeah, there's not sort of so many actual boy protags out there that maybe there could be more.
Yeah, which actually leads me very nicely onto my next question, which is about character. And sort of how do you sort of, you know, how does that process work for you with, you know, thinking about your recent books? How has the sort of process of your characters sort of evolved, and how have they evolved as you've been writing?
Do you want to go first on that one?
I don't really have like one method, if you know what I mean. I just, like, with the Girl Who, they came to me straight away, and I get to know them really well. And the one I'm working at the moment as well, the characters are just like fully formed in my brain. But with some of the others, with Dead Lucky, there was some character, the guy who got killed in the first line, I had his character in my head right from the start. But the main protagonist, I found a little bit harder. And the flashback character, Sam, I had Sam in my head quite clearly, but I just found Maxine, my narrator, quite difficult. But then, you know, eventually I managed to kind of find a way in just by finding her sort of weaknesses and her strengths and everything, and just like looking. So she's like, because she's an influencer, and everyone thinks she's stupid, because actually I spoke to quite a few people in the world of influencers, and they all think, you know, they've got a slightly derogatory view of influencers. And her job is, she's, you know, her shtick is that she's funny. So she does a lot of deliberately falling over on camera and, or, you know, trying out things that are going to make her look absurd. And so it makes everyone think she's stupid, and then it makes her think she's stupid because that's what everyone thinks of her. And then eventually she realizes that she's not, she's just funny. So that kind of really helped, actually, once I'd figured that one key thing out.
I think for me, because I don't plot anything, I never really know straight away. I kind of write with a very sort of cinematic approach, so I kind of see the story unfolding as I'm writing it. You know, I can literally sort of close my eyes and, you know, I'm in the scene writing it as it's going. I think with Mari in this one, because she had no memory and she didn't know, and the memory started to come back to her slowly. I learned about her as she learned about herself, which then gave me more about her motivations, you know, her choices, the reasons behind certain behaviors or mannerisms that she may not have understood at the time, but were influenced by things that she hadn't remembered yet. So I think it worked quite well in my favor of her not knowing, you know, who she was and what was going on at the beginning, because it allowed me to learn about her and, you know, what her voice and character was going to be as the story went along. I think when I've written other things, it's kind of been, again, as the stories have evolved and I've, you know, walked along with the character, I've kind of learned about them as they've learned about themselves, or they've taught me about themselves. It's almost like, you know, I'm just here for the ride, you know, the characters are in control. I'm here for the ride, and whatever happens, happens. And I think, you know, for me, that's quite a natural way, because then characters aren't being forced to do something that would be unnatural for their mannerisms or their behaviors. So it's more sort of a flow. Obviously, going back through edits, there's certain things that you always pick up on that don't quite fit or need to be adjusted, or, you know, don't quite fit the voice of that character. But for the first draft, I kind of just go with whatever flows and evolves naturally for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it's, you know, it's sort of, again, you know, quite often characters will take their own sort of direction, and especially if you don't sort of plot as well, is that you've got that sort of, you know, road of where you're going to go with them and where they're going to go, and you know, where they can go. I guess, have you sort of found with, because obviously you're both published, you know, was the publishing process harder as a YA novelist, or was it, you know, has it been similar to your other types of writing?
For me, the hard thing was the books both came out in lockdown. That was, you know, if whether YA or adult, I think, but
that would have been a nightmare.
Being YA made it a tiny bit harder because, you know, I in my head I was selling to 13-year-olds, or I wanted my book to be read by, like, you know, 13 to 18-year-olds. But those are people that don't have an Amazon account generally, and don't read on Kindle, and go, you know, go to the shops and browse around and grab stuff that looks good to them. And all the shops were closed when both of my books came out. So that was the thing I found hard about YA publishing.
It's that, I mean, you don't sort of, I guess, because there was, you know, there were things like this, you know, sort of, you know, that's where I started doing this back then.
Online chats. Again, that during lockdown, that network wasn't really fully set up.
No.
Everyone frantically discovering Zoom and use it and everything. And, you know, there were some people had like online book launches, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. And it wasn't really until we'd all been through it for 2 years that we started to get the hang of it. But, you know, publishers, I think, didn't really know what to do without YALC, without the Young Adult Literary Conference, and like school visits and other ways that they tried and tested ways that they had of publicizing books and getting them into the hands of readers. So everybody was trying to improvise, and I think it was quite a tricky time for sort of getting books into people's hands.
Because it's quite different for, you know, with a, you know, we set up in the library, we set up a, you know, an account, and, you know, we went on Zoom and we did it through Facebook, but you can't do that, you know, there's the safeguarding things in place for children, so you can't just go and do that for children and YA. So you've got to get the buy-in of the schools, or and, you know, and I know that has been set up now, but actually it's not as straightforward, is it? As, you know, as like you said about not being able to browse, but it's also, you can't just, you know, you can't just go out and, well, you can, I guess, but it probably wouldn't be advisable.
How to get yourself, you know, very
cancelled.
It's like going out and, I mean, I did have this dream that, you know, I was gonna be online, and then readers would just find me and oh, your book looks really good, then they go and read my book. And of course it doesn't work like that at all, because, you know, 13-year-olds don't want to cruise around Instagram looking for, you know, 40-something people to link up with, thank God. So
So that sort of marketing side of the books is a lot more complicated than in your sort of adult way. It just sort of goes on to Amazon or Instagram, or you can give it to book bloggers. I know there are bloggers that do YA,
and there are books too.
Yes, but if you want, like you said, if you want to reach those 13 to 18-year-olds, how do you do that? Libraries, I guess, and bookshops. And
there was also, at the time, BookTok was really taking off. One of my regrets is that I didn't really jump on that because I was too shy of that sort of thing. But also, authors can't really make their own BookTok. Yeah, they can't promote their own book through BookTok to viral level. It has to come from readers. That's the whole appeal of it. And I think publishers are still figuring that out. They're still trying to work out how to control BookTok, and they can't. I don't think anyone can, and that's why people like it, because it is literally just organic.
Yeah, and have you? Because I mean, I'm a bit of a dinosaur with TikTok. I don't really do it. I know I'm not the demographic, so I keep to my own demographic of Instagram, Facebook. So do you? But I know that there are books that have gone, like Sarah J. Maas and things have just gone crazy on there. That there's other books that have gone, sort of YA books that have just gone. But like you said, it is a process of someone doing it, isn't it? And then them having those followers and doing it. So yeah, do you dabble now with TikTok because it's because you need to, or do you still stay away?
I did dabble, but not so much now, because it's such a time suck, because you have to stay on top of all the trending sounds. If you don't, it's either you're in it 110% or there's no point, and I haven't got the space in my life to be in it 110%. So it's kind of on the back burner for a bit. And also, like I said, I do think it's a great space for readers, and I like watching other people's book reviews. But I just don't have the energy to create my own book reviews and then have 20 people view it.
So what are the sort of the challenges? And we talked about the challenges of sort of writing YA, but what do you like to think people take away from your writing? So what if you were sort of getting, because obviously I guess that's the other thing as well, is the book reviews you're not going to get the book reviews that 13-year-olds aren't going to sit down and write an Instagram post or or an Amazon review. So how do you get that sort of feedback about your books?
I think it goes back to the last question a little bit about the challenges of YA and that, and I actually find it harder with my adult book than I do with my YA book. Similar to you were saying, my previous book came out the day before we went into national lockdown, and that was a chapter book, and that changed the whole way that we look at things. I'm quite lucky in the sense that I'd had quite a few children's books out, and a lot of my readers have aged up as I've written. So I've got readers now that when I was doing chapter books and picture books 8, 9, 10 years ago, they're now in their teens. So I'm quite lucky in that sense that I've got a followship and a readership, and every time I've got a new book out, school visits, library visits, events aren't a problem. Whereas with my adult book, I'm like, what do I do? Where do I start? It's like starting all over again, because it's a different pen name and you're trying to build up a followship. It's not like I can just ring around schools and go, right, I've got a new book out, does anyone want to visit? Or ring the libraries that I've been working with and go, hey, do you want me to pop down and do some events? It's like the adult world is completely different, and I almost find promoting my YA book so much simpler than promoting my adult book. Even though, like you were saying, teens don't necessarily have access to an Amazon account, because I'd spent those years building up that sort of community and that fellowship and having that behind me, I find it easier with my YA book than I do with my adult book, because I almost feel like I'm back at square one as a newbie author, kind of going, hey, here's my book, someone want to say hi and read it. But reviews, again, it's so hard. My YA book sold out to pre-order twice before it even come out, and trying to get reviews from people is like trying to pull teeth. But yeah, we had blog tours that were done by young people, which were really nice. So my publisher this time focused on blog tours that were young person centered. And it was really, really nice to get that feedback and those reviews straight from the teens that were reading them. Whereas my adult book is obviously sort of, you know, in its baby stages and, you know, still trying to find its feet. So then trying to get the reviews and that is so much more important for that.
Yeah.
But it feels like a mountain. It feels like you kind of, you know, on that hard slug all the way up. So, it, you know, it makes your day every time you do see that one extra review added in and someone's actually liked it, or, you know, they've enjoyed part of it, or even if they haven't liked all of it, they've been able to say, I've read this book, this is what I think of it, you know, because not everything's everyone's cup of tea and everyone's going to have a different opinion and everyone's got different preferences when it comes to books, you know. I think if we were in this and we expected everyone to like our books, we'd be a little bit delusional. I mean, it would be nice, but, you know, it's nice to know that everyone does have different tastes, you know, and what, you know, what I might like, someone else may not like. But for me, the YA book was so much easier to promote than the adult book. It's completely different way of looking at things and way of doing it. So it's been an interesting process.
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Is like what you know as well. If you come into it like through, like you have, so you've started off with, you know, children's and then gone into YA and then gone into adult. Whereas so it just is what you, you know, sort of, I review adult books. I don't really come across YA that much, unless it's sort of like a, you know, a viral, like you said, a viral sensation where, you know, everybody's reading it and it's, you know, the next thing. So I guess it's just where you are in your little world, isn't it, really? And I guess trying to, for you as an author, or for you as authors, is trying to get into different worlds so that other people can see those books. And, you know, maybe one will read your adult book and then, or vice versa, and then pick up a YA because you've written it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I did a library talk on Friday, and there was so the demographic there was definitely towards the upper end of attendees, because it was talking about My Christmas Crime. But there was a woman there who had The Girl Who on her lap, and she was taken out of the library and getting ready to go. So it does. There is a cross pollination there. She's obviously, you know, that obviously not a teenager, but at the same time, you know, I think there is still an appeal. You know, if you like a writer, then you like their voice.
Yeah, definitely. So for anybody who's sort of watching, who is thinking about writing young adult fiction, because we don't generally, you know, we do a lot of crime, you know, obviously your books are both crime and you know, you both write other books as well, but what would you say, sort of any advice you would give for particularly wanting to set out in the young adult sort of genre?
Read a lot of YA. A lot.
Yeah, I agree. Read a lot of YA. Read genres that you normally wouldn't read, I think is a big thing as well. You know, not necessarily you're going to enjoy it the same way, but it gives you a wider understanding of how people write and how voice and character changes. But for me, it's write what you want to write. Don't write what you think the market wants, what the market needs, because publishing goes in trends. You know, they say there's a 10-year trend, you know, dragons are fun this month, but then they'll go out of fashion and they'll be back in fashion 10 years time. You'll see a dragon book that's really, really good. So you'll go out and write a dragon book. And by the time you've written it, publishing doesn't want it anymore. So for me, it's about writing what you want to write, what feels right to you. And, you know, don't focus on, you know, editing it over and over again until you've got that first draft done. The amount of people that I get come to me go, oh, can you read my first 3 chapters? I've edited them. It's like, focus on getting that first draft done. Focus on getting to the end. It doesn't matter how bad your first draft is. It can always be work done. It's better than an incomplete manuscript. You know, you can't submit an incomplete manuscript to an agent or a publisher. You know, you can revise and edit and fix a bad manuscript or a manuscript that, you know, has potential but just needs a bit of tweaking, but you can't, you know, you can't do it if you haven't completed it. So for me, it don't matter how bad your first draft is. Mine are always horrendous because it's me telling myself the story. And, you know, make sure that you're exploring as much as possible.
Yeah, totally. You can't edit something that doesn't exist. And that is, you know, the best advice to any writer is just write it, because otherwise it doesn't exist.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is that, you know, people sort of procrastinate about, you know, what they should write and what is sort of, like you said, about that sort of trend thing about, you know, it could be, you know, there was a thing, wasn't there, where everybody wrote domestic sort of, you know, noir, you know, the girl who and then that was like massive, and then, you know, it does go in, but you can't write. You can't write just because. I imagine it would just be impossible to just try and write what people want you to write rather than what you want to write.
Actually, on that note, never ever 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 call your book The Girl Who anything, because it is impossible to search on Amazon. So
is it?
if you put in The Girl Who, unless you put in the 3 dots, you get The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, The Girl Who Did this.
Oh God, yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so never ever call your book Girl Who anything, because unless you intend to somehow, I mean, basically, because all of those are multi-million international bestsellers.
Yeah,
my book is about 4.
Oh God, I hadn't even thought about that actually. Because
and don't forget that at this time all the shops were closed, so the only way to get my book was on Amazon, and you couldn't even find it.
Oh God.
So yeah, that was fun.
Oh, she's back. She's back. Yeah. It does drop out every day sometimes. It's just when I drop out, it's more of a problem.
Yeah.
Let's put her back in. Oh, there she goes. Hello. Oh, we've got a funny picture. Imaging Edge.
Oh, I don't know what that is. Can you hear me? I
can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh.
Flickering. It's flickering. I love the way it's backwards.
Let's see if I can fix it. Yeah. There we go.
Oh, you're just there. You are. Hooray!
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
So when we said at the beginning about the Goonies and things, we were talking about sort of, you know, this being, you know, a panel about sort of young things. So what, also with Christmas. So Kaz said yesterday, because all of our panels were based on Christmas films this year, the Goonies was, you know, precarious of whether it's a Christmas film or not. But I think it's a bit like Gremlins. I think it is. So what are your favourite Christmas movies?
Been thinking about this a lot. Go for it.
Nightmare Before Christmas.
Good choice.
That's got to be one of my favourite.
Yeah.
It's dark. It's not traditional, but it's fun and it's wholesome, and you know it's not with the norm. So yeah, that's always been one of my favourites.
You know, I really like that one as well. I've got so many.
Yeah, I had played a game with myself when I was writing my most recent book, Murder at the Christmas Emporium. I've basically hidden 6 Christmas movie titles in the book. And I don't know why I did that, because it's not like I'm launching a competition or anything. But, you know, you can find all 6 and you get a congratulations from me. That's the only prize. But I'm really rubbish at picking a favorite anything, because like my favorite when I was 12 is different to my favorite now, kind of thing. So I mean, you know, growing up, my mum always used to watch The Apartment, which was a black and white rom-com.
Oh yeah, I watched that a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's quite dark.
So I've got like a real an attachment to the Apartment. And another thing we watched, which has aged incredibly badly, is Trading Places. But it's still like there's still so many parts of that film that I love because I grew up watching it. And again, some slightly inappropriate scenes for younger people, but as well as the totally aging badly stuff. But you know, the things you grew up with don't leave you, do they?
No, well, I did that at lunchtime. I watched White Christmas, which again hasn't aged. It hasn't aged well, but I watch it every year because I really love it, and you know, it's just like you said, one of those things that you accept, and actually has a warning at the beginning of it now on Sky that says, you know, this has, you know, discriminatory content, and you know, but we've decided to show it as in entirety, and I don't want, you know, I'm a grown up. I can decide whether I want to watch things or not. So it's difficult, isn't it, when it's, you know, when things change and you have to
realize, I have that with a few of my, you know, I used to love Georgette Heyer books, and some of her romances occasionally did some like stuff in there that you're like, oh no, that didn't see that the first time around when I was reading.
It was a different
Christmas.
time.
It was always it was always like Carry On films and St. Trinian's at Christmas time. They weren't necessarily Christmas films, but it was always out watching that. And you watch them back now, and most people would look at them strangely. Same as Monty Python. You know, Monty Python and the Holy Grail was one of our sort of go-tos. And it's like, you look at it now, and a lot of people don't see it in the same way that we did when we were younger. And it's like, you can see the differences. But, you know, as you said, it's about censoring things. How do you grow and learn from things if we censor things and people don't see where we've evolved from to where we're at now?
So if you were sort of, so if somebody was to come up to you and say, you know, who are your favourite YA authors, who would you, if somebody's watching who's never read a YA book before, you know, I know it's a bit like saying what's your favourite book, but do you have sort of people that you mentioned, Melissa, that you'd got, you know, people that you'd read, who would you recommend people would, you know, maybe pick up?
So for me, my favourite YA authors, I've got a few. So K.L. Kessel, she's fantastic. She wrote The Boy I Am. You've got Catherine Evans, who wrote Beauty, Sleep and More of Me. They're sort of sci-fi. You've got Terry Perry, the thriller queen. She's phenomenal. Her books are amazing. You've also got Matt Clean, who wrote Orphan Monster Spy, which again is a sort of spy mystery thriller. And yeah, I'd say they're probably my favourites at the moment. But I'm always adding to it. I'm terrible. I'm so bad for it. Like, we can add that one into my favourites list. We can add that one into my favourites list. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, for anyone that loves horror, Padder O'Gillen wrote a book called The Call, and it's not a crime book. It is about fairies, but it's the most dark, twisted fairy tale you'll ever read. And I'm not into horrors normally, and it had me gripped. It's about fairies that steal children on their birthday into the fairy realm, and you have to survive 3 days in the fairy realm, which is like 3 minutes in the real world. And, you know, they come back mutilated, they come back flayed alive, they come back scarred. But if you survive those 3 days, you're then allowed to live your days, free. And it was the most dark and twisted thing I'd ever read, but I couldn't put it down. It was amazing.
That does sound good. Like the sound of that, not massively Christmassy, but
yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it doesn't have to be. It's just that I'm just thinking, that sounds good. It's not going to do much for my book buying embargo.
For me, because you just reminded me of The Hazelwood, and I'm trying to remember the name of the author of The Hazelwood, but that's really good. That's about a girl who's got mysteries in her past, and she her grandmother, I want to say, wrote these fairy tales, and then it turned out that, you know, the fairy, you could get into the world the grandmother wrote about, and it's pretty dark and grim, because I love dark fairy tales. So it was great. Then also I really like Cynthia Murphy and Catherine Foxfield. Josh Winning has written a really fantastic, fun book. If we're talking about the Goonies vibe, Josh Winning really loves 80s movies, and he's done this sort of thing that's almost like a tribute to like The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and things like that, with like the sort of alternate world of puppets kind of sort of coming into the world of humans, and it sort of all merges together. So it's got this great retro kind of sort of scary appeal with puppets, fighty puppets. So that's fantastic.
Puppets are quite scary, aren't they? Really, they're a bit like clowns, puppets. You know, they can be. Yeah,
I've just creepy automatons in my latest. So I obviously love something a bit like that.
I'm just looking at our questions, and Victoria has said, which books are on your Christmas list?
Too many. Literally too many. I think if I ever tried to buy everything on my Christmas list, I'd probably put my back out at the moment. But there's quite a few on there that I want to read. I'm just trying to think. My mind's gone blank.
I know, it's always that question where you put you on the spot and you
If you asked me what was on my TBR, I'd be able to answer that. But I've just bought Happy Head by Josh Silver, which I've heard really good things about. And Melissa Welliver, she does dystopian rom-coms. God, I've got loads on my TBR. But yeah, I don't actually have anything on my Christmas list. I don't trust people to buy me books.
No, I don't either, because they only ever buy me ones that I've already got.
Terry the Patient, that one's on my Christmas list. It's she was a YA, well, she is a YA author, but she's moved into adult recently, and she had a couple of books out. But The Patient's her first one, so that one's on my Christmas list. It's supposed to be really, really good.
Also, in tribute to Will Husty, I want to read the second Jericho as well. So that's on my. I read the first Killing Jericho, and I'm just Jericho's dead now.
So poor Will. I hope you're feeling better, Will. So what's I'm looking at the time, and like I said, the hour would go quickly, and it has, as it always does. What's next for you? YA, adult, children's, whatever. What's coming up next in the next 12 months?
For me, more festive, ho-ho homicide, as my friend likes to call it. And also I have got like a couple of YA side projects that I really want to get my teeth into, but I'm gonna nail this first draft first, and then I'm gonna go back to all these ideas that I've been playing with this time.
Writing Christmas books, just veering off the subject, but because when you've written Christmas books, I'm quite fascinated with when you write them. So are you writing like this year's, like next year's now?
Yeah. Because the thing about Christmas is like it's the one deadline that never moves.
Yeah.
So even if you're struggling, and this last one I found really hard, it was just, some books are just like that, aren't they? And I could have done with a few extra months, but strangely I can't fold space and time, so I have to do it really fast and work longer hours.
And that's really tough, isn't it, with Christmas? Because everybody wants to have a break at Christmas. Everybody wants to go, oh, I just want to put it down for like until January now. I keep seeing things on Instagram about saying that looks like it's a January job. You can't do that when you're on a deadline.
No, I want to get to 40,000 words before the end of December. I'm on 35 at the moment. So actually it looks completely achievable, but I just don't trust myself to achieve it, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And Melissa?
I'm working on book 2 for running, so I'm working on that at the moment. I've got another adult book that I'm working on, but at the moment it's just trying to get into festivals and events and get out there with the adult book for 2025. I've got loads of events booked for YA books, so I'm at lots of festivals and schools and that over the year. So it's more trying to kind of get my foot into the adult world and work out how to be an adult and an adult writer. But yeah, I'm working on book 2 for running at the moment, and I'm also working on a secret project that I'm not allowed to talk about at the moment.
Oh, that sounds exciting. Oh, on that bombshell.
It's a YA, but it's something different. So yeah, it's fun.
Exciting.
Because we were talking at the beginning, just before we came on, that you have various pen names. So we call you Melissa, but actually you write, and so your YA books are under BB Taylor, and so your adult book is a different. Can't see that. Oh yes,
you've pixelated.
Yeah, you've pixelated a bit. It the bottom screen isn't, but Pandora's War by M.M. Bailey. You like your double letters, don't you, at the beginning?
Yeah, I'm really not original when it comes to it. So yeah, it just seems to flow. So
no, it's good. It's have a thing. You can just go through the alphabet when you write different genres. You just have different.
Tell you the nice thing about doing Cordani, it's impossible to remember and pronounce. The plus side is that when you are on bookshelves in Waterstones or wherever, you are sandwiched between Bernard Cornwell and Jilly Cooper, which is a very nice, snuggly place to be.
It is. That is a good place to be. Yeah. Well, when I saw you in Toppings on Friday, not you literally, but your book, you were on a table with Peter Swanson, and hang on a minute, I'm just gonna have a look, because you were on a table with quite a lot of Reverend Richard Coles.
Yeah, all the Christmas crowd.
All the Christmas crowd. Yeah, you were there. And the 12 Puzzles of Murder, I think it's called. It's
like the cost of 12 thing. I mean, you know, that's what mine is.
Yeah, well, this is like a puzzle book. The 12, and there's quite a few sort of anthologies as well, isn't there? Where like the sort of haunting and the creepy fairy, the festive tales and things. So
yeah, love a spooky festive tale.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much both for joining us. It's been really fascinating to talk about your writing, and please come on and speak to us again about your different topics when your new books come out. So we'd love to have you on. Thank you everybody for joining us. We've got the end of year big festive quiz at 7 o'clock this evening. So if you want to fancy a quiz, join us at 7. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And Christmas, everybody.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.